All right, we're ready.
Okay, so did you want to start or did you want me to start? How do you want to do this?
Yes, I can start. Hey, ladies, how are you doing today? Welcome to Girls Like Me, our Saturday session. And we are so happy to be here, so excited. And today we are speaking with Miss Lelia Bundles, the great granddaughter of Miss Madam C.J. Walker, the famed cosmetologist, entrepreneur, the first female Black multimillionaire. And we are just excited to speak to her today about Self-Made, the new movie that is on Netflix. She wrote a book called On Her Own Ground about her family's history and about Miss Madam C.J. Walker. And the book the movie was loosely based on the book. And she just wanted to talk to us about her great great grandmother's legacy, her book, entrepreneurship, and just the differences between Hollywood and what we actually see and know in factual history. Because we all know from our own studies and what we talk about in Girls Like Me, that what we see in the media and what we talk about see on Instagram or on TV is really different from what's actual and factual and what we as women and girls represent. So Miss Alelia, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. And that was, that's a perfect way to set the stage. I'm just really glad to be with you. I actually have a Google alert, so that every time Madam Walker is mentioned, in an article or on a website, I get a little notice in my email. So that's how I found out about Girls Like Me, and
Wow.
found out that you were talking about the movie. And it's, you know what, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Say it for me.
Elisa.
Elisa. So Elisa and I reached out to her. I went to your website and reached out to her. And we began to have an email conversation. And I said, I would really love to speak with the young ladies. Excuse me, one sec.
Oh, no problem.
I'd love to speak with the young ladies and just hear what they thought and see if I can't help untangle a little bit about what's fact versus fiction. So I'm glad you already are having conversations about how Hollywood and music videos and the media in general change reality and sort of make us feel like we have to live up to something that's impossible to live up to. So maybe before we get started, I would love it if everyone would introduce themselves and just, maybe tell me what grade you're in and what your favorite subject is.
Okay, so I'm going to go down the line. So first is Devin and Dara.
Hi, I'm Devin. I'm in the 6th grade and I like history. Hi, I'm Dara and I'm in the 5th grade and I like global studies.
Global studies?
Yes.
Great.
Wow. Miss Tawanda, you can say hey too.
Hi, I'm Tawanda. I'm Devin and Dara's mom. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Is it my turn? Yeah, okay. My name is Diamond. I'm 15 and I'm going into sophomore year, and my favorite subject is chemistry. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can barely hear.
Sorry. My name is Aaliyah Wright. I am going to the 10th grade, and my favorite subject is reading.
Great.
My name is Michelle. I'm in 9th grade, and
Okay. Okay, you're muted. Elisa's muted.
Thank you. I do this every week. The girls know, they're laughing at me. So I was saying Aaliyah and Michelle, their bandwidth is a little low. It's giving me an alert, so their sound isn't as clear. But I know that Leah is very interested in art, and she's going to the 10th grade, and then Michelle is going to the 9th grade. So, and next on our list is Micaiah.
Hi, I'm Micaiah, and I'm not in school anymore. I just graduated from Gordon College with a social work degree. So,
Yay.
Congratulations. She was one of our,
thank
she
you.
is our first member of Girls Like Me. She's an alumnus.
Great. And now a mentor, probably.
Yes, now a mentor. We got to put her to work. And last but not least, our wonderful mentor, Miss Mia. I'm trying to unmute you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Mia Watson. I'm a mentor with Girls Like Me. I graduated 5 years ago. My major was in neuroscience. I'm pursuing a career in medicine, so hopefully that'll be happening sooner than later.
This is wonderful. So would one of you like to just give me a little description of why Girls Like Me was created and how you got involved?
Mia, I think that's a great question for you, Mia.
Absolutely. I actually got involved with Girls Like Me about 5 years ago. My mother is a pediatrician, and I think Elisa reached out to her to speak about healthy relationships and healthy, lifestyles and things like that. So ever since then, that was all she wrote. I've been involved. I've been able to, participate in events and mentor different girls when they attend the events and everything like that. So to me, I think Girls Like Me is a perfect opportunity for girls to come together and kind of talk about a lot of things that, they might not always feel comfortable talking about in various settings and things like that. So they're able to, get advice from adults that they feel comfortable talking to and just kind of express themselves and, talk about their dreams and things that they want to accomplish. So I feel like Girls Like Me is a perfect platform for that. I honestly wish they had something like that when I was growing up. But, it's kind of nice to be able to give back and help in that way, especially because they're all on different parts of their journey. Some are, in 5th or 6th grade, and some are in high school, some just graduated, so it's great to be able to give my perspective and things that I've learned back to the community. And I just feel like Girls Like Me gives me the perfect opportunity to do that.
Right. Well, I am just really impressed listening to you. Everybody has, their head on right and doing things. So I'm just really glad to have the chance to speak to you and that Elisa was willing to let me talk, because she may have shared with you my journey to getting to this Netflix series is that, I grew up with this being my family. My mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company, and my dad was president of another Black hair care company. So the family business was hair care, and we went to hair shows during holidays. But my real passion was writing. And I know that that's part of what you talk about. What is it that you love and how you develop it? And I'm really fortunate that my parents encouraged me to write. So I worked for the school newspaper in junior high school and high school, and in college I worked for the radio station. I actually was DJ. I had a jazz program. And then I went on to do a career in journalism and in network television news. But at the same time, when I went to graduate school in journalism at Columbia University in New York, my advisor was a woman named Phyllis Garland, and she was the only Black woman on the faculty. So I think it's so important. We can learn in all kinds of environments, but sometimes we need a mentor or a person who looks like us sometimes, yes, to encourage us. And so Phil recognized my name, my unusually spelled name, this A''L Elia. And Phil had been a longtime journalist. She'd worked for Jet and Ebony. Her mother had been editor of the Pittsburgh Courier, a Black newspaper in Pennsylvania. And when I was trying to figure out what topics I was going to write about, I know we've all been there, like, what am I going to do my report on? And I didn't have very imaginative topics. And at the end of the conversation, Phil said to me, well, your name is Alelia. Do you have any connection to Madam C.J. Walker? And I wasn't walking around talking about it. You know, kids, you don't want to like do something that makes you different from other kids. So I was kind of quiet about it. And I said, well, yeah, that's my family. And she said, that's what you're going to write about. So this is totally the power of a professor or a mentor or somebody who really cares about you, who can sometimes see talents or things that you have going for you that you don't even recognize yourself. That's when a person who really cares about you will look for ways to empower you and to encourage you. So Phil did that for me. And that was a really long time ago. That was 1975. So, you know, you can do some math on that and come up with that number. But I, you know, wrote my paper on Madam Walker, and then I went to work. I went to work at NBC News, and then I spent 13 and a half years there, and then ABC 16 and a half years. But now I have written 4 books. And it really is the research that I did about Madam Walker and her daughter, Alelia Walker, that led to these 4 books. And the book in particular, On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, is the book that was essentially what the word that Hollywood uses is optioned, which means they buy the rights to your book. So my book was optioned a few years ago, and that book became the inspiration for, and inspiration is kind of a code word in Hollywood for, we're going to change your story a lot and fictionalize it.
We're going to do what we want to.
Right. We're going to do what we want to. So that became the inspiration. So, but it's a very Hollywood story. So if any of you are writing stories, you're writing books, you're writing plays or short stories, and you think, how does it get to the point where it gets to be a movie? And so that journey has its own, you know, sort of its own ups and downs along the way. So I'm going to talk a little while, and then I want to get questions from you guys, but I just want to give you this background. So after I wrote my paper in graduate school, then I did a little research, but I had to go to work. And so on holidays and weekends, I continued to do some research. I moved from New York to Houston, then I moved to Atlanta, and I was continuing to do this. And then we got a call from Alex Haley. So everybody knows about Roots, the book and the miniseries. And Alex Haley was really riding high in the early 80s, you know, one of the most famous Black men in the world, and his series Roots, everybody knew about it, and he wanted to do Madam Walker's story. So we had a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I said, Mr. Haley, I would be really happy to do research for you. So I started doing research. But Alex never finished the project that he started, but in some ways, I feel like I met him for a reason. He became a mentor for me, and I did this research, and then after he died, I had become friends with his editor for Roots, Lisa Drew, who was at a big publisher called Simon & Schuster. And Lisa signed up my book, the book that eventually became On Her Own Ground. So I'd had that first kind of round of the famous Alex Haley being interested, but that didn't work out. Then after I wrote On Her Own Ground, there were HBO was interested, and CBS television was interested, but those things didn't happen. And that's, again, a pretty typical Hollywood story. The fact that a movie gets made is kind of a miracle, people say. And then eventually I was approached by Mark Holder, who acquired the project. And I really had a great conversation with Mark. He loved my book. He understood all the research I had done, how, you know, many years I'd spent on trying to get the facts and, you know, get rid of the myths about Madam Walker. And I agreed to work with him. But then something happened that is also a very Hollywood story. After he acquired the book, he then brought Octavia Spencer on, which I thought was fabulous, because I think Octavia Spencer is great. And I think she did a great job in the film. But then it takes this kind of other twist and turn, where they hired a writer, and the writer was a woman named Nicole Asher. And Nicole Asher and I had really different ideas about how to tell Madam Walker's story. But once your book is acquired, the studio takes control. And I had a conversation with Miss Asher. And during that conversation, she was giving me her ideas about how she wanted to tell Madam Walker's story. And she wanted to have essentially a competition between two women. And that's exaggerated. And she wanted to make up characters, and she wanted to do a lot of exaggeration about relationships. And I said in that conversation, well, I don't, Annie Malone was Madam Walker's real life rival. They were rivals. They had a competition, but I don't think it was the center of either of their lives. I probably wouldn't make that the centerpiece of the story. And apparently, because I didn't agree with her, she made sure I wasn't in the conversation as the story was being developed. So that was really very difficult for me. So for the next 2 years, I kept politely trying to offer my suggestions. And one of the things that my contract said was, while I didn't have approval of what was finally in the script, I had script review, which meant I could review and read the scripts before they started filming. So I read this, I was able to read the scripts, but by then the studios had already approved the storyline. And so they tweaked and they changed a few things. So now we have the story that we saw. So as I say, I think Octavia Spencer was great. I think that there were some things that were really strong. I loved the scene in the market where Madam Walker is trying to convince other women to become agents. I thought that was really great. I think it showed you that you have to have courage and tenacity and determination to build a business. But there are all kinds of things. I think the conflict between the two women is just horrible. I mean, I just don't know what else to say. Madam Walker's real life rival was a real Annie Malone. You guys have done some research on her, was a successful Black businesswoman, a philanthropist who employed thousands of women. She wasn't light-skinned, but the scriptwriter wanted to create a colorism theme, which is an important topic to talk about, but it didn't exist between these two women. So that then changed the whole thing. Like, their enemy wasn't color. Their enemy was the larger society that was, preventing Black women from having opportunities. And they created a character, Esther, who was supposed to be Alelia Walker's girlfriend, who didn't really exist. The real conflict between mother and daughter was over two boyfriends of hers, both doctors, both handsome, one who was kind of a bad boy and one who was, kind of a straight arrow. She ended up marrying both of them. So that was made up. And then another character that was made up was the character Sweetness, who was the numbers runner, and the pimp who didn't exist in real life. And it made Mr. Ransom, one of your questions is about reputation, and it made Mr. Ransom look like he was something other than what he was. He was really kind of a real law-abiding straight arrow who protected Madam Walker from people like Sweetness. So those are some of the things that, just to give you an idea, and I know you think about, when you see something in Hollywood, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to make sure that you're comparing it. So you have such great questions, Elisa. I would love to take questions from everybody and really tell them who I think Madam Walker really was, the parts of her life that I love and that made me want to study her life.
Of course. So who has questions? Let's start with the girls. Wave your hand if you have a question. Okay, I'm gonna start with Devin and Dara. Okay, I unmuted you guys.
Okay. So do y'all still make her products?
Excellent question. Actually, let me just show you something. I have here are some of the products. Let's see, is this the right way up? So yes, the products are still made. Now that's got a little bit of a backstory. So Madam Walker's original product was Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grow. Wait a minute, I can show you that too. So this is a little box, Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grow. So that was, you know, when you think about more than 100 years ago, most Americans did not have indoor plumbing, which meant they didn't have bathrooms inside their houses. So if you wanted to, you couldn't just get up in the morning and turn on the faucet or jump in the shower and wash your hair. And so sometimes people didn't wash their hair maybe once a month, sometimes not at all during the winter. So they had really bad scalp infections, really horrible dandruff. And her original product, her Wonderful Hair Grower, was really solving that problem. So the main thing that she did was to encourage women to wash their hair more often with a vegetable shampoo. And then they applied this ointment that was kind of like Vaseline, but it had sulfur in it as a medicinal agent. So the person who majored in who's chemistry, you will understand what I'm saying. Diamond, is Diamond who's interested in chemistry?
Yes.
So Diamond can help explain this to you guys. And so that would heal the sores on her scalp, and then the hair could grow back. So that was really her big product. But that was something that was revolutionary 100 and some years ago when she started. And since then, we have learned a lot. There's been a century worth of science and medicine and research and development. So now the products have evolved. And so where we know that our hair needs moisture and it needs hydration. So this new line of products is manufactured by Sundial Brands, the same company that makes Shea Moisture and Nubian Heritage. And it includes a lot of exfoliants and conditioners and moisturizers. So the products right now are available at MCJW Beauty Culture and at Sephora.com. And I'm the historical consultant, and we're getting ready to make some changes. So in about 30 to 60 days, all the products are going to be online on their own website. So I'll let Elisa know when that happens.
Yes, you do.
So about that, so Mr. Dennis, he also acquired your great-great-grandmother's house, because he acquired the estate. So can you talk more about that? Yeah, I will.
Sure. You know, there's so many great stories that Madam Walker inspires. And Richelieu Dennis, who is the founding CEO of Sundial Brands, came to the United States from Liberia to go to college in the late 80s. And when he graduated from college in 1991, his mom came for graduation, and she took the last plane out of Liberia because there was a civil war. And so they couldn't go back. He had planned to come to the United States, get a knowledge about business and go back and be in business, but he couldn't go back. And so he and his mom and another Liberian friend of his started selling shea butter using his grandmother's recipe at 125th and 5th in Harlem. And he built that into a multi-million-dollar business through the years. So that's why you can see the products that he's made. And then he sold the company to Unilever, which is a big international company. They make Dove and other kinds of products that you're familiar with. But he's still involved with the company. But what he did was to take part of the proceeds from that sale and buy Essence magazine and Essence Festival. And then he created a venture capital fund for women of color entrepreneurs called New Voices Fund. So you can Google New Voices Fund and you can see all these beautiful sisters with their businesses and all the things that they're doing. I think it will give you some inspiration. And then one of the other things he did was to create a foundation to purchase Madam Walker's mansion in Irvington, New York. So that now it's actually undergoing some repairs. It's in great shape for a house that's 100 years old. But you know, with COVID-19, it slowed down some of the repairs, but eventually it will be kind of a think tank meeting place for the women who are in the fund. And Elisa, once you guys start meeting in person again, I'll send you some books for the young ladies so they'll have copies. They can see some of these photographs and have a chance to read about Madam Walker.
I would love that. This is a great ongoing conversation. One of our core values is entrepreneurship skills and being able to just apply leadership and entrepreneurship skills to every part of your life, as well as, going into business for yourself and using your own skills to make a living for yourself. So can you talk about Madam Walker's entrepreneurship and what values that you want the girls to take from what Madam C.G. Walker learned in her skills, her entrepreneurship skills and journey?
Sure. So just so you know, I mean, I think in the series, you didn't really get a sense of where she came from, how she started out, because it sort of starts out, she's a washerwoman in St. Louis, and you don't really know much about her background. So just a little bit of a history lesson about her. So Sarah Breedlove was her birth name. And Sarah Breedlove was born in 1867, 2 years after the end of the Civil War. And she was born on the same plantation, cotton plantation, where her parents and her older siblings had been enslaved. So she was the first child in her family born free. And when she was 7, both of her parents died. And she moved in with an older sister, and her older sister was married to a man who Sarah would later say was so cruel to her that she really wanted to escape that situation. And she said, I got married at 14. We do not recommend this, but at times were really different. But she said, I got married at 14 to get a home of my own and to escape the treatment of my cruel brother-in-law. And then when she was 17, she had her only child, Lelia. And then when she was 20, her husband, Moses McWilliams, died. So now she was alone again. But fortunately for her, her brothers had moved from Louisiana to St. Louis, which was one of the biggest cities in America at the time. And they had become barbers. And this was at a time when Black men dominated the barbering trade. And their barber shop was very near St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. So when Sarah Breedlove moved with her young daughter, the young widow, moved to St. Louis, she began to go to the church that was near her brother's barbershop, St. Paul. And the women of the church embraced her and began to show her that she could be educated, that there were things that she could do. They began to mentor her. She had a good enough singing voice that she was in the choir. So she started, absorbing, getting her grammar was getting better. She was learning, that she could go to school. And so those things began to set her on a path to improving her life. And of course, like all mothers, she was doing this because she wanted her daughter's life to be better. That was her motivation. And I know that's what the moms who are watching, I know that that's your motivation for the things that you do. And so as she moved through this life, she was working as a washerwoman. She didn't have a lot of education. And then her hair began to fall out. And as I was explaining to you, this was a hygiene issue. Many people were having this problem. And for a while, she learned some things from her brothers who were barbers. And for a while, she sold products made by Annie Malone, the lady who would ultimately become her competitor. And then she moved from St. Louis to Denver, where she had a widowed sister-in-law and nieces because she had sent her daughter off to school. Soon, her good friend Charles Joseph Walker joined her in Denver. They got married, and she started her own business because she learned a few more things about chemistry from a pharmacist for whom she was a cook. So the two of them are now in business. Her daughter moves to Denver. She and her husband begin to travel around the United States because Denver didn't have a very large Black population, and their customers were Black women. So she wanted to be in places where there were more customers. And she did that. She settled briefly in Pittsburgh, and then she moved to Indianapolis, where she built her factory. And her daughter persuaded her that they also needed to have an office in Harlem. Her daughter was living in Pittsburgh, so she was, up the road from you guys. And then, so then now they had Indianapolis and New York offices. But the thing that the takeaway for me of her life, as she was developing this business, she was starting to help women and mentor women in the same way other women had mentored her. And she developed clubs, local clubs and sales agents, and she would empower women and she recognized their leadership abilities. And actually in 1917 in Philadelphia, she had her first convention of her sales agents. And I'm trying to remember the name of the church, but it's the church that Marian Anderson went to. So you may know the name of it, but it will come to me. But at any rate, she had her first convention in 1917, and 250 Black women from all over the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America came to the convention. And these are women who otherwise would have been farmers or sharecroppers or maids or cooks or laundresses who now had their own independent income as Walker sales agents. And at the convention, they talked about ways that they were educating their children and buying homes and investing in real estate, and how their lives had changed because now they were financially independent. And she said she gave prizes to the women who had brought in the most new agents and who had sold the most products, but she also gave prizes to the women who had contributed the most to charity in their communities. So it was about, yes, I have a hair care product, you like the product and you can sell the product, but it's what are you giving back to your community? And she said to the women, I want you to understand that as Walker agents, your first duty is to humanity. I want others to look at us and recognize that we care not just about ourselves, but about others. And at the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson urging him to support legislation to make lynching a federal crime. So in the same way that we're experiencing things like the death of the sister in Louisville, the brother who was in Atlanta, those same kinds of things were going on. And she felt the need to speak up.
Yes. So, wow, just so many points. But especially what stood out was her leadership ability to drive home the core values of the company through incentive. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and you're right. You said when the core values, I mean, she said, first of all, the most important thing is first you have to have a good product, a high quality product. Well, sometimes your high quality product is you and how you present yourself. And you mentioned that, being a storyteller, being your brand. So you have to first show up as you and with your reputation and who you are and what you stand for and your integrity. So that's your product, but then it could be selling a product. And then you have to promote it. And promoting it sometimes, it may be, yes, you're advertising. She did a lot of advertising, but if you're still in school, sometimes promoting it is making a good grade and studying hard. It's different ways of how you show up and build a reputation.
Exactly. Ladies, does anybody else have a question? Raise your hand. Just wave and I'll unmute you. So I'm gonna start with Diamond and then I'll go to Micaiah.
Okay, so in the movie, they were like, Madam C.J. Walker had stole like Annie or Addie's formula, like for the original like hair product. Is that true, or that is like Hollywood?
Yeah. So did she steal the product? That's a really good question, and I no, it's not that simple. So the formula that Addie Monroe had been around, I mean, literally for hundreds of years. It was really pretty basic. It was, excuse me, like Vaseline, but with sulfur. And it had been used by doctors, by pharmacists for a really long time. So it wasn't really original to Annie Malone. There were even other Black companies that used something very similar. And Sarah had learned some things from her brothers who were barbers. And then she had worked as a cook for a pharmacist, and she was selling Malone's products at the time. But he said, look, here on the shelf, there are other things that are very similar to this. Cuticura was already on the market. And so he said, I can help you tweak this so that you have your own version of it. So it is yes, she was selling something very similar, but stealing the formula when Annie Malone herself wasn't the first person to make it is a little bit murky. And, as somebody said to me, if you make a sweet potato pie and somebody else puts more nutmeg in it than you did you steal their, did you steal their recipe, or were you just altering it?
Yes, that was one of those Hollywood versus real life stories, real factual
Right.
history. So I'm gonna go to Micaiah.
Okay.
Hi. So in reading about her background, we just see a lot of her like marketing strategies. So door to door, having those little ceremonies for the women who sold her products, and just being very hands-on. Excuse me. What has been the biggest shift you've seen in beauty marketing today, and just comparing it to what she did and what her agents did back then?
That's a really great question. And, I will say a lot of what she did is people are still doing, because there are just certain principles that really work. One of the things she did in recruiting sales agents, now, everybody doesn't do direct sales, and that was key for her because she didn't have the internet. And she couldn't, just go on Instagram. Though, if she were living, I'm sure she would be an Instagram girl. But she had to actually go out and meet with people. She had to travel. So she had a strategy of being on the road most of the year. She often traveled with a traveling companion who would help her with the sales, and she would send letters because Black people couldn't stay in hotels at that point. She had a network of friends and allies who were members of churches, ministers, members of fraternal organizations. So she would arrange ahead of time to say, I need to stay with you, can I stay with you for a week while I'm there doing my sales? And she would go to a town and have a big lecture at a church. And the first part of her lecture, which is, what people do, it's what Michelle Obama did selling her book, when she traveled around the country, same kind of thing. So she would have a lecture, and the first lecture would be about current events and what was happening with Black people in business and in education. And she even had a version of PowerPoint. It was something called a stereopticon, glass slides that were then projected through an electric projector, and the pictures were up on a screen. So she was talking about sort of motivational speaking. Then she would second pull together a group of maybe 10 to 15 women from the audience who said they were interested in being her sales agents. And she would meet with them separately. And she would demonstrate her system. And as she was demonstrating, she would ask if anybody had questions, and she would see who had the best questions. Who did the other women listen to? Who had charisma? And she would make that person her lead sales agent because she knew that person was a leader. And then, then eventually other women might rise to the occasion as well. So that was key for her. As she traveled around, she was encouraging women to take her course. Sometimes they couldn't come to her school in Indianapolis, and so there was a mail order course. She also really very much believed in advertising. She advertised in most of the Black newspapers. And I'll tell you, her ads are really pretty interesting. She would use a before and after picture, kind of like Jenny Craig commercials. So her one picture would be in the center, you would see a picture of her with very short hair, which really was her, kind of patchy, her hair had fallen out. And then on either side of that, there would be a front view and a side view where you could see this long, bushy mane of hair that showed that her product really did work. And then she had testimonials. She had letters from one woman wrote to her and said, before I started using Madam Walker's wonderful hair grower, my hair was 1/8 of an inch long. And now my hair is down my back, and I have been able to throw my wig away. But it was always also about being economically independent and helping women. And so she also included letters from her sales agents. And another woman said, "You have made it possible for a Black woman to make more money in a day selling your products than she could in a month working in somebody's kitchen." So all of those things pulled together to help her be successful. And then once she started having national conventions and doing the publicity she was doing, that brought in even more people. And they could see that the money that she was earning from the Black community, she was putting back into the Black community.
That's amazing. And I'm glad you mentioned the lectures and the slideshow because I read that in the book. And that just reminded me of Instagram. So as soon as you said the pictures, that reminded me of Instagram. I was like, oh, she's telling them, you know.
She totally would have been on Instagram. And she
Yes.
would have been doing IG Live all the time. You know, and that is part of, what you see with beauty companies now. Everybody's got their sort of their influencers, their key influencers, who are the people, the beauty mavens, who have millions of followers.
Yes. I feel like they've all gotten their strategies, or Madam CJ Walker, as many women in the beauty industry say, that she is literally the blueprint. So you can really see that, especially how you spelled it out in the book. Any other young ladies have questions? Just raise your hand for me. Okay, that's Leah and Michelle. Make sure you guys speak up.
My question was, what was your ideal type of, like, how would you describe Madam CJ Walker's show? So you said you were against two people with two different perspectives.
Okay, so she said, how would I describe Madam Walker's?
Like, how would you write Madam CJ Walker's show?
Also, Leah and Michelle, type your question for me, and I'll make sure I'll get it for her.
Perfect.
Anybody else has questions in the meantime? Go back to Devin and Dara. Go ahead.
Is it more ingredients in her hair product than it was hundreds of years ago?
Yes, definitely. So, the original product, so in this original Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grower, this basically had what was called petrolatum, which is like Vaseline, and then sulfur, which is I'm gonna depend on Diamond to explain how that works for you guys, why that heals the scalp and skin disease. And then it had a perfume, because sulfur has kind of an icky smell, so that kind of masked that. And it also had beeswax. So those were the things that were the original products. But now the products have now a lot more moisturizers, a lot of natural ingredients, and there are things that, I think there was certainly a time in our history when most Black women were straightening their hair one way or the other, whether it was the hot comb or chemical straighteners. And when that was happening, the last thing you would do is want to get your hair wet because it meant that your hairstyle would be destroyed. But I think we have evolved now. And so I think however people want to wear their hair is fine with me. But I think what we now understand is that we do need hydration and we need moisture. So what we used to run away from, we now are embracing. So that's why we all say we use lots of product. And product does different things for different people. We all have different hair textures. So while I may, really admire somebody who has a big, full hair that's twisted and goes like this, my hair won't do that. So that's not what my hair is going to do. I have 5 or 6 different ancestors going to work in my hair. But so one of the things that's been a hair journey for me at the age that I am is that I've learned now, what is my hair texture? How do I work with it? I'm a low maintenance kind of girl, so I'm not going to do a whole lot of things, but I know other people have many more skills than I do. So I use different products, and I use what I use. And of course, I always use the MCJW ones. It's not that I don't like other companies, but I just want to make sure that I'm using these. But what I use in August when it's humid outside is going to be different than what I use in December when it's drier outside. So I think over time you experiment with things.
Yes, I agree. I'm about to say some people still feel a way about water. I know I do, but you're exactly right. Like, I think hair care has definitely evolved to where we have different needs and we have different concerns, but it's still a major cornerstone and importance in our culture and for Black women. Miss Mia has a question.
So I guess mine's more so, I guess, just kind of like a statement, not necessarily a question, but I just think it's very interesting. I kind of went on my own like hair care journey. Because back when I was younger, a lot of people would perm their hair and do things like that. And it's just it's lovely to see women embrace their natural hair more nowadays, and kind of get back to their roots and not feel ashamed of their kinky coils and everything like that. And I just think it's amazing, how you'll see like younger girls, like their parents just like let them rock their natural fro and things like that. And it's just interesting, like how you said, I mean, there's so many, it's definitely a journey of patience and learning and everything like that. And it just, I feel like I didn't really learn a lot about Madam C.J. Walker when I was in school. And, it would be something that I would have admired when I was younger and like, wow, like, like people actually aren't ashamed of like their natural beauty. They're not trying to like shape it into something else. And that's something that I really appreciated and have definitely been learning throughout my whole entire journey as well. So
well, I'm glad, and I will tell you, the journey continues for the rest of your life. I've had every kind of style you can imagine. I think the only thing I haven't had is locks. But I've had just about everything else.
Right. Whew, can imagine.
So now, do we have the typed questions yet?
Yes, we do have the typed question. I think what she's trying to ask, what Leah is trying to ask, is what is the idea behind you looking at your family's history? What made you want to dive into your family's history and develop your great great grandmother's history? And then how did you ultimately feel about it getting to this stage? How did you ever think it would get to the point where it would become a movie or a show?
Right. Great. It's a great question. So when I was, as I said earlier, when I was growing up, kind of the last thing I ever thought I would be doing is telling my great great grandmother's story. I just wanted to do me. And I think that's, healthy. And my mother really did not make it a big deal, because I think you can kind of overwhelm kids if you if you have a famous relative and you're trying to live up to something that's impossible to live up. You have to be yourself. And that was really what my parents were encouraging me to do. But as I developed these skills as a journalist, and I was telling other people's stories, I'm realizing, the stories of Black people and Black women are not told. And so we grow up thinking that we don't have any stories. We grow up thinking that we weren't important. And so it really did become important for me to tell the story. And when I was writing, first I wrote a young adult book. And I'm going to send you, I've written 2 young adult books. The book that I'm going to send for you all to read is the second version. But I wrote a young adult book in 1991, and there had never been a book written about Madam Walker. But that was true for most famous Black people, or not famous Black people. There were very few books that were available to me growing up about African Americans. And so I ended up writing the books that I wish had been written for me, because I didn't want you guys to not have books. And there are a lot of other people who feel the same way I do, that we want to make sure that you go into life as you are growing up with role models, with people who look like you in books. And it's not that we can't be inspired by other people's stories. It's that we need our own stories as well. I loved biography when I was in elementary school. And I remember reading about a guy, now you will never have heard of this guy. His name was Newt Rockne. He was the head coach at Notre Dame, football coach. I'm not a football fan at all, but I loved the stories of people and how people overcame obstacles. So I still remember that, but there were no books in the biography section in my elementary school about Black people. So I read about other people. It's okay to read about other people, but we need our own stories for inspiration. So that was part of my motivation. And then as I began to do speeches about Madam Walker and talk about her, and I could see the impact it had on others, that it was inspirational, it pushed me to do even more. So while I guess I always thought that the story should be in Hollywood, but it is really difficult to get these stories made. I mean, the conventional wisdom in Hollywood is, oh, these stories don't sell overseas. Well, now that's been, that myth has been burst because Black Panther was very successful, as are many, many other movies. But then even when there is a story like this one that defies all stereotypes, it still gets distorted. So when something is told, period, and gets to the screen, it's a big deal. And when it gets told with some integrity and faithfulness to the fact, it's an even bigger deal. But I will tell you, while you may think, oh, she's really successful and she got this book done and she's had this great career, I have a lot of battles too. And you will have battles all your life. There will always, but the key, which is what I'm sure you're learning in Girls Like Me, is how do I move beyond the battle? Even if I lose that particular battle, what do I do next? And in my case, while I'm so thrilled that this film was made and that millions of people around the world know who Madam Walker is, it didn't come out exactly the way I wanted. But I'm not mad. What I'm trying to do now is make sure that the next thing I work on, I have more control over it. And I have found a lot of allies in the process. Octavia Spencer has been great, even though, she had to read the script that was given to her, but she's encouraged people to read my book. And I know that she's somebody who I would be happy to work with again. I just wouldn't work with the script writers again. But, you make the best of the situation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I try to encourage the girls often to do what you love and to do what you're passionate about, but also to know that it's not going to be easy. You're going to take different journeys and different paths, but ultimately just try to hone in on what you do like and what you do know that you're able and capable of doing. And I think it's awesome that your mother didn't force you or pressure you to kind of follow the family lineage or industry, because ultimately what you did was still so pivotal and impactful to the legacy of your family, because every family needs a historian. So it was almost like perfect that you came along and wrote and researched your family's history, and now we all have it to share, and it's accurate, and no matter how it's portrayed, we still have the facts. So, and that's very important and awesome. So
well, and I hope that this will encourage all of you to do some of your own research on family history, because yes, I do have a couple of famous relatives, but I really love learning about all of my relatives. I am the family historian. I do the genealogy on all of them. Every family has amazing people, the people who, as we say, made a way out of no way. And those are people that I admire, and all of you have that. And I really encourage you, now, especially because on your phones, you can interview people. But start with the oldest relative, the oldest grandparent, the oldest aunt, the oldest uncle, And, you know, every time you see them, and now you may not be able to see them in person, but you can talk to them on FaceTime or on Zoom, and just ask them to tell you a couple of stories. It doesn't have to be a long conversation, spend 5 minutes, but every time you talk to them, ask them to tell you a story about their childhood or about their parents.
Thank you all for being patient during those pauses. But yes, that is very true. I know for myself, I'm always asking my grandmother questions, and she has so many sisters, and it's such a long history of women. Nobody's famous or anything, but it's just awesome just to know where they came from and how much they did just and stuck together. So family and history is very important. Girls, do you all have any questions? Just wave your hand for me if you have any questions. And we've been on here about an hour. So, Miss Alelia, do you have any anything that you like to tell us or leave us with, that you like to encourage the girls to follow their dreams, or to even stay in Girls Like Me, or to stay connected to mentors or to you or anybody that can help them do what they dreamed of doing in their whole lives?
You know, I just want to say my hat is off to you for organizing, and for all of you who participate. You are so lucky, young ladies, to have an organization where you can come together. There is nothing in my life that beats the sisterhood, my girlfriends, my book club that meets every month, the longtime girlfriends that I had, my childhood friends, some who I've been friends with since I was 3 and 4 years old. And these are friends who sustain you through life. And you have an organization that is encouraging you, that is saying, you know, be good at what you do. And if you have a problem or you have a concern, this is a safe space to have the conversation. So that is a really, you know, that's a gift. And I'm just so glad for all of you that you have it. At least I would just say there's something that I like to leave people with, which is some advice from Madam Walker. And she said that people often ask her the secret to her success. And she would say to them, there is no royal flower strewn path to success. And if there is, I have not found it. For whatever success I have attained has been the result of much hard work and many sleepless nights. I got my start by giving myself a start. So don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. You have to get up and make them for yourself.
That was awesome. The best advice ever. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to put everybody on gallery view, and I'm going to try to unmute everybody at the same time so we can do a group thank you. All right? So everybody's unmuted. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Oh, that was perfect. All right, thank you so much. All right, we're going to get off. I'm going to pause the video, but we're going to give official goodbyes.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the holiday.